right, good morning, everybody. How we doing, Ignite? Oh, come on, a little more enthusiasm than that. This is going to be a fun session. There we go. Now we're talking. Thank you all so much for joining me here today. Last year, I started a series that I like to call Ghost Stories with Uncle Jeremy, and we're hopefully going to continue that series on this year. Really what I like to do when I come and I have an opportunity to present at an event such as this is that I come in and we don't just talk about the theory of some of the things from a cybersecurity perspective. I love to bring real world use cases. And so that's where the ghost story comes in, because it's a little spooky, a little bit scary, but it always has a happy ending. So we'll go ahead and we'll skip in. So obviously today, voices you can't trust, stop AI-powered impersonation attacks. Wow, that is a mouthful. But really at the end of the day, what are we here to talk about? We're here to talk about deepfakes, the rise of deepfakes and social engineering attacks, and how do we, on the right side of these types of activities, protect our organizations and our people from being successfully exploited by these. So my little clicker is not clicking. Hang on. That's all right, we can improvise. Okay, so by way of introduction, for those of you who maybe I haven't had a chance to meet before, my name is Jeremy Nelson. I'm CISO of North America for Insight. I have been in the IT industry for a very long time. I'm not gonna go through the lengthy introduction. If you wanna read it, take a screenshot, whatever. I'm going to go into the fun facts because I think that's a little bit more interesting. Number one is this year marks my 30th year in IT. And I have earned every one of these gray hairs through those 30 years of service. Everything starting, and cybersecurity has always kind of been at the core of what I did, not necessarily in a traditional cybersecurity role from the very get-go, but I grew up in kind of like that .com era. And for those of you who maybe experienced that, a lot of my first experiences in cybersecurity really came at the hands of my coworkers. And we loved playing pranks on each other. Everything from infecting each other's machines and forcing your CD tray to open and close spontaneously, fairly innocuous, to literally creating an invisible box that your mouse couldn't get out of. And so I spent an inordinate amount of time both on the clock and off the clock trying to find ways to harden my machine to make sure that I wasn't the victim of a prank, but also coming up with some unique and creative ways to exploit the workstations of my fellow peers as a way to hopefully make them the victim of one of my attacks. The other fun fact about me, and this is not a joke, my favorite restaurant is Taco Bell. I love to bring something a little bit fun and personal about myself. Any other Taco Bell fans out there? Let me see some hands. There we go, there's my people. Big fan, so obviously the natural question comes in, well, what's your go-to items on the menu? I will tell you right now, the 5-layer beefy burrito is where it's at for me. I will eat those all day, every day. And the Doritos Locos Taco. Now, with the Generations, I think is what they're calling it, menu, they did bring back the chili cheese burrito, which I think is single-handedly the greatest culinary invention ever of humankind. So if that's available, that is definitely my go-to. All right, so let's move into a little bit more of the content. So I mentioned a little bit around how long I've been in this industry. So over the past 30 years, I've kind of seen the evolution of really what was the traditional IT ecosystem. So this is a quick diagram that you can see. It was really easy. We had these data centers. We had our entire IT estate that was really kind of enclaved behind this walled garden. It was very much a castle and moat type of an approach. And so the edge of our IT environment was fairly easy to define. It was the branch offices, it was the primary data centers, and so we were able to kind of build these nice walls around that. We understood where our data was. We were able to understand, from a relatively easy standpoint, who are the bad guys and who are the good guys. Well, obviously, we've all matured beyond this because we know that there is just limitations of scale, the limitations of the ability to have flexibility, elasticity, high availability, disaster recovery. And so very, very expensive. And so we've obviously seen, we've grown into something that looks a little bit more like this, right? Where it's more of a mesh architecture, where we've got various different pockets of applications, services, data residing across a variety of different data centers. So everything from hyperscalers to platform as a service, to software as a service holders. Our clients kind of fall into that. We have edge computing and all these different ways that we consume data, we compute that data, we analyze it, and then we leverage it for our overall business outcomes. And so now, what does that mean? Well, no longer do we have this nice defined perimeter. And so what becomes the actual edge of our IT ecosystem now? And that is identity. Identity is now our new security perimeter, if you will, that's guarding this highly complex, highly distributed overall IT ecosystem that each one of us support every single day. And so identity is a unique thing. So here are a couple of case studies that are out there. We're going to talk about these here briefly, where identity has also proven to be, like, as the need for that identity has expanded to become this overall security perimeter for these highly distributed IT ecosystems, our ability to continue to support them and the overall attacks that go against our identity stores have become more and more sophisticated, and it's harder and harder for us to be able to protect our environments from these very different attacks. So a couple of different things to kind of highlight for each one of us. Number one is, so this is, anyone familiar with the Clorox event that happened a few years ago, almost 2 years ago exactly? Anyone? Wow, okay, no one tried to buy bleach 2 years ago. Major cyber attack that happened a couple of years ago, literally stopped their manufacturing process, really disrupted their entire supply chain, and a lot of it was traced back to the threat actor was provided credentials through a help desk incident. So they were able to call into the help desk, they were able to gain credentials that allowed them to perpetrate the actual attack that resulted in the overall compromise of their IT environment, limiting their ability to produce products, caused over $380 million worth of damages to actual Clorox. And so they're basically going back, and the support desk was provided by a third party. And so they've literally brought up litigation against them to try and recuperate some of those lost financials. So obviously, huge risk in the form of service providers who go in and are providing identity services or support desks to their various different clients. The middle one, I love this middle one. It's fascinating to me. Anyone familiar with this one? The Hong Kong, $25 million. So basically, you had a financial processor in an organization in Hong Kong who got a message about an acquisition that they were looking to make. And they got a message from their CFO. And at first, here's the funny part. At first, the financial processor got it and thought it was spam. But it was followed with a video conference. And so that video conference, she joined in, and it had their CFO and a whole bunch of other internal stakeholders represented on this call. Everyone on video, everyone speaking. They had a conversation around exactly what this transaction was, the need for urgency, really needing to get this cut, needing their support. And so they moved forward. And they wired $25 million over a series of broken apart payments within a matter of hours. $25 million gone. Not one single person on that video conference call, other than the financial processor, was who they were. Everyone else was fake. Completely synthesized video and voice. And then the last one, KnowBe4. I love this. They even published their own case study here. They went out and they were looking to recruit new developers. They found what they thought was a really good talent that they wanted to add to their overall employee pool. So they moved forward, they interviewed, they did background checks, they onboarded this individual, all to find out that it was a North Korean state actor. And so they basically onboarded an internal threat actor. And so they went back and they unraveled it. The way that they found out was that after they had onboarded this individual, they shipped a laptop to them. It ended up going to a laptop mule location where somebody received it, opened it up, powered it up, provided VPN access from North Korea to the person who'd actually gone through the onboarding. The primary reason why they got caught is they were a little too ambitious. So literally, once they powered it on, connected it up to the system, they started downloading malware packages onto their company laptop. EDR picked up on it. They obviously tried to reach out, tried to get this person on the phone. They became unresponsive. Within less than, just short of an hour, they had the asset quarantined and mitigated the risk. But obviously, fully onboarded this individual. They went through everything that you would consider to be the right process, procedures, and protocols to onboard somebody, but they still onboarded somebody who wasn't at all who they perpetrated themselves to be. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. It's going to be identity. And so keep in mind, try and remember these three use cases. So we're going to focus pretty heavily on the help desk aspect of this because we only have a limited amount of time today. But the overall solution that we're proposing is something that could be used to combat the deep fakes and the various different attacks that happen in all three of these different scenarios. So keep that in mind. All right. So when we talk about the help desk, right? Why is the help desk such a great target for these threat actors and these social engineering attacks, right? So I've got a couple of things here listed. Number one is, what's their charter? They're there to be helpful, right? They are the help desk. So at the end of the day, the way that their success is measured is how effectively do they help the people that are calling in looking for support. Number two is they need access, right? You have to have an elevated level of access in order for you to effectively do your job. So if somebody calls in, they need their password reset, you need to have the heightened access to their actual identity store to be able to go in and mark it and walk them through the procedures to change their password. MFA, the list goes on as far as like the number of reasons why they would need heightened access. The other being, we need predictable outcomes, right? And so the way that we drive predictable outcomes is they're heavily script driven. And so it's very predictable as far as the various different steps and stages that they will take as they work with an individual to get them to the point of resolution. And last but not least, and I think this is by far one of the most impactful, is what's one of the primary KPIs for a help desk? Time to resolution, call time, right? You hear it all the time. What's your call time? What's your call time? What's your call time? So they are measured by how quickly they can answer the phone, resolve the problem, close it out, document it, and move on to the next call, right? So speed is extremely important to them. Unfortunately, every one of these is a key reason on why social engineering attacks can be so successful against the help desks. So here's the part that I promised you. I come bearing gifts. This is an actual voice recording of a lead threat actor group calling in and actually calling into a help desk to try and get them to basically move an MFA token to their device as opposed to the internal user. So we're gonna go ahead and kick it off. It's pretty short, I promise, but hopefully you'll find this enlightening.
Tech service desk, what's your employee ID number, please?
Hey there, Walter. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. What's your employee ID number?
My employee ID number is PB, B as in boy, 002
I'm sorry.
981.
What is that, TB?
That was B as in boy, 0000 221.
Okay, I got B0021. It skipped out on a number there somewhere.
2921.
Okay. All right, so when you say the numbers, I need you to put a space between them. The error correction software on the phone is deleting some of the numbers. So you got to put a slight space between them, like a 1 second delay. So 1,
right.
2, 3, okay.
All right. B 0 0 2 9 2
Okay,
1.
got it. Okay. And what's the issue you're calling about today?
My MFA, like the number that I used to sign in, it's changed because I got a new phone with T-Mobile. They made me get a new number and I can't really sign in because of that.
You have a new phone?
Yeah, I have like a new phone number, so I can't really sign in because it's asking me to send it the old phone number.
Did you get a new cell phone number?
Yeah, I got a new cell phone number.
Okay. Did you enroll in a BYOD?
No. It's just like,
Okay.
I can't sign in because of my MFA is on my old number is the problem.
Well, I thought you had to enroll in BYOD to get the MSA app on there in the first place. If you're not enrolled,
No,
then you've got to enroll in BYOD.
Like I can't sign in because like the phone number on my account is like my old one. So I need my mobile number changed on my account is what. Like nothing about BYOD. It's just like my mobile number's changed. I need it updated to my new phone number.
Okay. Are you trying to send yourself a code?
Yeah, I'm trying to send myself a code, but it's not sending because it's my old mobile number on the file. So I just need the phone number updated, my new one.
Okay, so you're not signing into MSA.
No, it's just like my mobile number is my old mobile number when I try to sign in. And when I text the code, it just texts my old mobile number.
Okay, so I'm not sure what you said, but MSA is not it because you're not in sales. So it wouldn't be that.
Yeah, it's not MFA. If the code, it texts to my old mobile number.
Right, so you're trying to use
mine.
Right, you're trying to use Password Manager in that process to send a code.
Yeah. That's the one, yeah.
Okay. The Ford truck.
So I just need that number updated to my new one.
Right, hold on, we got two different places it could be in. You're trying to log into a server, it's going to be another location, but we'll deal with that.
No, not a server, just a password manager.
All right, what's the last four of your social?
4649.
Okay, and what's your cell phone number?
I edited it out.
3097.
Okay, and what's the area code of your old phone number?
I believe the old area code would be.
Okay, so you got to log into Insight and update your personal information for that cell phone. You don't change that. They don't have the information as far as HR is concerned for them to contact you. So you want to update that as well.
You updated it in like
So
the
that
password
is-
manager?
Yeah, it's updated in Password Manager. You'll be able to send a code to yourself now from
Alright.
Password Manager. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Have a good night. Bye.
You too. Have a good shift. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so how did our boy Walter do? So first off, before I go into that question, it talked about logging it into Insight. I want to be super clear, that's not this Insight. That is an internal HR system that they have. So just to make sure that we're all clear on that one. But how did our boy Walter do? So let's go back to the 4 metrics that we had on how we measure the success of a call center call. How did he do? He was patient, right? Even when he started getting frustrated, he was helpful. Did he resolve the problem? He resolved the problem. How fast was he on the, how long was that phone call? Less than 5 minutes. What's our usual KPI? Usually about 5 minutes is kind of like the KPI for measuring overall efficacy of turnaround. Did he follow the script? Did he follow internal procedure? He asked for personal identifiable information or to make sure that, that they've basically prescribed as far as like, hey, this is how we identify an individual before we'll take an action like this. So how did Walter do? Terrible. He did terrible. At the end of the day, he literally transferred MFA, he updated the phone number to a third party. Now, is all of this Walter's fault? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The system that he is operating within was not constructed in a way to provide him or his organization the tools that they needed in order to be able to combat an attack such as this. So we'll kind of step in. So here's some of the anatomy, right? So what are some of the things that this particular threat actor used? They used kind of emotional manipulation, right? The urgency, right? Obviously needing to get logged in, needing to be able to get access to their systems. Catch that moment where he started to get a little bit frustrated. Hey, no. Like really correcting him, trying to bring him back, using a little bit of those intimidation tactics in order to be able to get Walter into a little bit more of a compliable state. So he is a little bit more inclined to rapidly support him so that he's not having to deal with those heightened emotions. Disconnected logic. There are a few ways where obviously they have an internal application called MSA that they were using for accessing to servers, but they talked about password manager in a different way. And so there is even a little bit of a disconnect as far as like some of the terminology that they were using. And obviously the threat actor used that as a way to create circular logic loops to kind of keep Walter guessing and basically filling in the gaps on behalf of the threat actor in order to be able to get them to the resolution. And then last but not least is what about that process for identity validation and verification? Bad. Everything that he asked for is easily searchable, right? I mean, what was that? I'm trying to remember the exact number. 360 million Social Security numbers were leaked in a breach a few years ago. So I basically walk around thinking that my Social Security number is out there, right? Like it really is not an identifiable piece of information for me anymore because it's just broadly out. And that's one of the key pieces of information that they use for doing ID validation. So this is kind of what we looked at. This is a very legacy call flow when we talk about this through the context of help desks, right? Call setup, we do initial issue triage, we identify if it kind of falls into 3 buckets, right? Is this just like a routine system support issue? Is it a sensitive support issue? Or is this potentially a high-risk support issue? So when they come through, if it's obviously routine, we just go do routine, we do the troubleshooting, we resolve, we move on with our lives, right? If it gets into the sensitive area, what are some things that are potentially sensitive? What would you guys consider like a sensitive request? Whoa. There we go. Yeah, like password resets, like the things that you want to do an extra level of validation to make sure that they are who they say they're going, who they say they are, and before we move forward. So lots of times we would typically send like an MFA token, like a generated request, right? Pop out of the existing support system, go over into Active Directory, or go into Enter ID, send out an MFA prompt, basically get the help desk prompt back. Okay, what's the number? Type the number in, confirm, okay, we're good, right? And then we go back into following our troubleshooting procedures and resolution. But when we think about high risk, right? So what did we do here with Walter? We did a full-on MFA token shift to another device. When we think about the $25 million transaction that occurred, when we talk about potentially asset requests coming in, those can kind of fall into that high support risk. And a lot of things, what ends up happening is that the best way to secure that is, we just don't do that. We don't do that over the phone. And so we basically draw a line in the sand, a hard line, and we are no longer to provide the helpful support part of the support desk because we don't have the controls in place to be able to do that and execute that safely. And so a lot of those call flows just end with, okay, I can't verify who you are, support stops right where we're at, and you either have to come into an office or you provide some other alternative means for them to be able to get the support that they're after. Not the most effective way, not the best overall employee experience. So all of these things that we've reviewed really make social engineering attacking a prime, absolutely just fertile ground when it comes to AI-driven attacks. So AI is phenomenal at taking data in based off of an entire data catalog of learned material and predicting an outcome or predicting the next step based off of the outcome it's trying to achieve, right? Like that's what generative AI is phenomenal at. And when you think about that through the context of a highly scripted support desk that you're calling into, you can build an AI model to go out and basically in real time, listen to the questions that are being asked, generate a response. We already know that AI is phenomenal at recreating audio and video, and then being able to provide that the appropriate response to get us to the overall outcome that we're looking to achieve. So, fun fact, how long does it take for an AI model to learn and replicate your voice pattern?
4 seconds.
What was it?
4 seconds.
About 4 seconds, yep. Valley is down to 3 seconds. This is the latest Microsoft publication that I've seen. 3 seconds, so think about that. How many of you have posted anything on social media? How many of you have been interviewed on webinars, LinkedIn Lives, the variety of different things that we can get our voice out there? A phone call, right? You happen to answer one of those spam calls that kind of come in. 3 seconds is all it takes, and you can be completely recreated from a vocal standpoint. So one of the other scariest parts about this is that think about the folks who have the highest amount of authority to execute high impact activities within our environment. Who are those? Who are those people? Public facing, our senior executives, right? Your CEOs, your CFOs. Like these are folks who are out there constantly outwardly facing. They're presenting, whether that be through quarterly financial reports, whether that be through various different other webinars or whatever that might look like, but they are very, very present. There's a tremendous amount of data out there that can be consumed, and these models can be trained to replicate them very, very effectively. So not only can we now build the models that allow these attacks to execute very effectively and very efficiently, but now we can do it at scale. So when it's people, right, there's a certain amount of scale limits that we run into, but when you start turning it over to the machines, they can just start bombarding the various different help desks that we provide and coming at them at a velocity that it's very, very difficult for us to maintain. And at some point, so how many times as the good guys do we have to be right, percentage-wise? 100%. How many times do the bad guys have to be right? One time. They just got to slip one through, and that's all that it takes, right? And so that's the challenge that we have when we're talking about incorporating AI into these deepfake social engineering style attacks. Oops, I actually got a little ahead of myself. Okay, so let's talk about where does verified ID come in? So before we jump into that, one of the big issues is why is deepfake so effective? Why does that work so well? I hear some rumblings. Say it a little louder.
Trust, familiarity.
Trust. It's validation, right? We're doing identification authorization, and we're using something that is built into each one of us as humans that's evolved over millions of years, right? Is through facial pattern recognition that we do visually, as well as audio pattern matching that we do audibly. And so all those things through years and years, we've literally grown up and built that into, okay, if I see this and I hear this, I can trust that the person I'm communicating with is the person that they claim to be. And that's one of the things that we're really trying to fight against is AI can replicate that so completely that it literally incapacitates one of our most effective identity verification protocols that we have as human beings. And so there's a need to do something a little bit different. And that's really where we see that verified ID as a part of Entra really plays a key part. Right? So yes, we're going to talk about this through the lens of Entra ID, but there's a lot of decentralized identity protocols or identity platforms out there that we could use to achieve this exact same outcome. So for those of you who may or may not be familiar, so when we're talking about verified ID, this is that decentralized identity protocol. And we'll actually get to the architecture here in a little bit, but the whole concept is when we talk about identity, what's the first thing that usually comes to mind when you think identity? Face, okay. Username, I love it. Name, what's the other piece? Password, right? One of the things I love having this conversation of is when we start talking about identity, everyone immediately starts to think of really just authentication, right? A username and password and even MFA to a certain extent is just authentication. What sits behind those is your identity. Your identity is who you are as an individual, your role, what are you responsible for, what should you and should you not have access to as an organization. That is your identity, right? And so when we start talking about Entra verified ID, we're now starting to talk about identity in the true context, where it is a complete package of different elements about who you are as an individual and different data points about who you are and what you should and should not be allowed access to. And so, but it's a way that now is autonomous from highly centralized IDPs. So that's one of the big things that I think we've seen develop over the years, right? Is IDPs are kind of like the heart of a lot of our digital interactions that we have today. You go and you visit a website and they're like, hey, you need to log in. You go to log in and no longer is it an ID that lives in their system. It comes back to usually 4 or 5 key IDP providers that are out there. And so IDP is becoming more and more centralized. And so a lot of these very monolithic organizations own your identity and the way that it's represented across a very, very global space. And really what this is Entra ID, verified ID, is a way for that to now be democratized and for you to be the owner of that identity. It lives completely out of band from some of the other identity sources and ways that we think about identity today, which is great because it allows us to be able to use that identity for out-of-band authentication and validation that allows us to accelerate and secure some of these types of workflows that we're talking about with the help desk. So we'll kind of move on to the next here. So one of the big things is that when you usually talk about security, what does everyone get freaked out about? It's going to do what? Slow things down. Security is going to slow things down. In this case, really what we're looking at is we want to make sure that we're providing security services that could actually accelerate. How do we make it faster? Not only more secure, but how can we actually make it faster? How do we streamline support? How do we actually build some of these tools directly into the interfaces and the ecosystem that they use to provide support on a day-to-day basis? And number one is, how do we not necessarily have to get InfoSec involved in every single phone call to triage and to make sure that the people calling in are who they say that they're supposed to be? So through the incorporation, and so this is just kind of an example of a matured workflow, right? So now we've got that same routine support, follows the same path, sensitive support information. You can kind of go that same kind of trajectory as far as like MFA token validation, just very, very basic, very fast. But now we start getting into the high-risk support. And we can incorporate things like facial recognition enabled verified ID for being able to do out-of-band validation of the identity of the person calling in. And we can now actually troubleshoot, resolve those issues, provide a better overall user support experience, be able to maintain all those KPIs that help desks really, really care about. And so how does that happen? So this is just a real brief kind of overview on what it looks like. So when you go through, when you're onboarded, you go through the process of actually getting issued a verified ID. So how many of you carry a wallet? There we go. I'm like, come on, don't be shy. I know there's plenty of people still out there carrying wallets, right? So wallet has what in it usually? Driver's license. What's a driver's license? An ID, right? And that ID was issued by who? The state. Is that a trusted entity? Sometimes, I love it. Sometimes, for the most part, we've all accepted that the state-issued IDs are fairly secure, like they are a trusted, like they are going to do their due diligence to validate the identity of the person that's going to be issued that ID. Are there safeguards built into that driver's license that you get? Yep, all kinds, right? Like you got holograms, you've got like mag stripes on them, all kinds of different things that try and create and establish the authenticity of that document, right? And so basically what we're talking about here is very similar in nature, is that we're now talking about a digital ID that's very much akin to your driver's license that you now get issued by a trusted issuer that you keep inside of a wallet. And what you see here is a representation of how we would actually issue and create that ID as a part of the onboarding process. Don't worry, we're gonna get through it. We're gonna get to a point where we actually show a demo of both the issuance of a verified ID as well as the use of it in a support desk workflow. But I do want to talk a little bit about the architecture. I know we don't have a ton of time together. This is something I would love to do a deep dive on. And I apologize for using the Microsoft. I wanted to make sure that this was as representative of Entra ID as possible. But we could go into decentralized identification at a much deeper level. But how many people here are familiar with PKI? There's some hands. All right, my PKI people. I love it. I'm a big PKI guy. A lot of this, very, very similar principles, right? Public key, private key type of an architecture. The big thing is that in PKI, what do we have? Who issues the certificates? The root, right? Our root authority issues those out. So what is that? Is that centralized or decentralized? Highly centralized, right? So the issue is how do we now break that apart and use that very effective asymmetric encryption protocol, but do it in a way that's decentralized. And that's really what you're looking at right here, is you have the concept of the issuer, the holder, and the verifier, right? So the issuer is like the state, where we go and we basically provide documentation that allows them to tell us, or allows them to validate who we are. They issue that ID, we then hold that ID, and then we go to present it to somebody else who wants to verify ID. There's a way for it to trace back to this trust system. It's kind of like an anchor, if you will. Like I said, we could get into more of the actual specifics of the architecture, but we've got limited time. But it's a way to come back, and it's a form of blockchain to be able to actually validate the overall keys that are being stored and presented as part of the verified ID. Really, really cool system. But again, what it does is it allows for you to own that ID. And so again, keep all this in mind as we come back and think about the 3 use cases that we started off our session with. So here's our other video that we're gonna go through. And this really shows the process of somebody coming in and basically trying to get support. For our friends here at Woodgrove. So the first thing is they're presented with their support desk portal, and they don't have a verified ID yet. So the first thing they need to do is enroll. Now, our friend Dean, who happens to be here in the front row, already has validated credentials, and so what he's doing is he's using his My Account portal to go in, generate a QR code, and he's going to be able to generate the verified ID right from there. So you can see, comes up, uses his phone, scans the QR code. In this instance, we're actually going to use Authenticator as our wallet. Interestingly enough, is that the wallets now that exist on our phones are also capable of doing the same type of identity storage that we're talking about here. So you can see here, so he went through the process. He now has a verified ID. It's now stored in his wallet inside of the Microsoft Authenticator app. So Dean still needs to get the support from the help desk that he's after. And so he's going to pop back over here in just a second. My timing's a little bit off. There we go. So he popped back. Now that he's completed his verified ID, he's going to go back to his internal support page. And we'll now move on to step 2, because it'll now see that he has a verified ID. So step 2 is going to have him use that verified ID to authenticate himself to the actual help desk portal app. And so guess what he's going to do here? As you'll see in just a second, there's our phone. We scan the QR code one more time. This time, instead of adding a new identity to his wallet, it's going to recall the ID that he just created inside of that wallet. But this has a special caveat, because we want to make sure that we are ultra secure in the way that we're doing this. And so we're actually going to do a facial recognition, real-time facial recognition, to make sure that somebody hasn't taken Dean's phone and is actively trying to authenticate and execute this particular help desk support intake. And so there he is, Dean's face. It scans it in real time, validates it against the profile ID that's stored in Entra ID, comes back, says that he's verified. And so now that we've actually verified him in real time based off of active facial recognition, it comes back and we get to the point where we can now open up a support desk call. So this is just one example. Again, this is only an example of the support desk. Think about the ways that this could be used in those other 3 use cases that we were talking about. So when we're talking about the $25 million wire transfer that happened, a lot of organizations that I actively support are now getting to a point where multiple people have to be involved in a transaction of a certain size. But think about if we had a way to do this. You basically provide them a similar type of a portal where they can go in and they can actually have the requester, you send them a request and they go in and they have to provide a verified ID before you will actually move forward with that conversation or even consider executing a transfer of a specific size or magnitude. And in lots of cases, you would actually go through and have multiple people do the same type of validation. So I like to think of it, again, I already talked about how old I am. War games, anyone remember the movie War Games? There we go, there's my hands, my war game people. Remember at the very beginning of the movie, how it started off? With the 2 guys going down into the missile silo, right? And they get the order to actually launch a nuclear strike. Is one person able to do it alone? No. No way, right? How many people did it take? 2. Each one of them had what? A key. And how were those keys close enough that somebody with both keys would be able to activate them? No. Highly distributed, turning the keys at the same time. We're looking to actually use verified ID as a way with multiple individual authentication as a way to add that same type of nuclear launched 2-key protocol in place in order to be able to protect those critical organizational funds. So, okay, so here's where hopefully you guys will get some value out of this. So Insight has gone through and implemented this ourselves. So both from an internal asset and asset protection standpoint, but also, as I talked about before, you see the situation with the Clorox suit. We do provide support desk services to organizations. And so we want to make sure that we're doing an appropriate level of due diligence in order to be able to validate identity before we go through and provide services that could expose authentication, authorization tokens to a potential threat actor. So here is basically at a very, very high level some of the main phases in a Gantt chart of the way that we rolled out our own verified ID face checking program. So the first one was we just conceptualized it. We identified that there was a business need, that there was a business risk that we needed to address. And so we went through, we identified the risk, and we looked at what are the ways that we would be able to potentially combat this and to be able to provide an appropriate response as an organization. We landed on verified ID with facial recognition. So we quickly moved into action, and I think the business requirements here is very, very interesting. So one of the things as we were going through this process that we really identified was, okay, what are the various different business cases that we have? Like, what are the use cases? We talked about the help desk. We even looked at not necessarily just token resets, password resets. We even talked about like some of the other cases that I brought up. What about calling in, asking for a laptop? What about some of these other types of internal sensitive type actions that we do? We're an organization that's consistently making acquisitions. Do we need to provide a certain level of verification and security around those types of transactions that we're making? So building out those use cases, aligning them to our requirements. The next one is really working closely with our legal department to make sure that we have a good understanding on what are we permitted to do. Right now, we're heavily focused on rolling this out for North America. There's a lot more complexity as we think about a global implementation of a solution like this. The nice thing is, though, is that at the end of the day, verified ID, who owns that? Like, who ends up being the holder at the end of the day? You, as the individual, you are the holder, like, because it's your identity. And so that really helped us as we were going through the legal analysis. One of the big areas that we are still trying to understand some of the nuances is that there are municipalities here within the US that do have a right to use when it comes to biometric data for an organization. And so we're trying to figure out, like, where does that lie from a legal standpoint, especially in, like, I'll call it out, like Chicago specifically. We have a very, very big presence. They also have one of the most strict employee elected biometric data retention, I guess, legal precedents that have been defined up there within that part of the country. But then starting and then rolling it out through HR, right? Making sure that HR is on board, they know how to both, they are aware of, approve, and support it, and then moving into an actual deployment, right? Like, so creating the employee opt-out program, what does that mean? What does that mean? How do we support them going forward? And also making sure that we have updated photos. How many people here go and look at your gal, and when you see somebody's photo, it comes up and it's a robot, or it's like an AI-generated cartoon depiction of that individual, right? We have lots of that. We're an IT company, we got lots of that. People are jokesters. And so having to go through, and we really can't support that. In order for the facial recognition to work, we need to have high resolution photos of people's faces on file in order for that back-end system to work effectively. So going through and working with people who are going to be in the first waves or second waves or eventually the entire company, making sure that we have good usable profile pictures stored so that facial recognition will work effectively. And then we get into the actual development piece. So yes, Enter ID has all the tools that you need, but in order to incorporate it into your workflows, we found that we use a contact center for our support desk. And so we needed a way to build an integration from the actual contact center directly into Enter ID so that we were able to keep our support desk teammates inside of their interface. They didn't have to break out. They didn't have to log into a completely different interface in order to do verified ID. That right there within their workflow, click, 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 send a verified ID request. It's literally built into their workflow. So we went through a series of integrations in order to be able to optimize and streamline verified ID into the workflows that were going to be secured by it. Then obviously the normal testing, doing a proof of concept with the internal help desk, and then a complete rollout to the entire desk. And then the last piece being communications and training. Or I will say this, I've said this a million times before, organizational change management is the #1 tool for effective cybersecurity deployment. In order to roll out a new feature capability from a cybersecurity standpoint, organizational change management is probably one of the biggest keys for it to be successful or for it to fail. And so we really focused heavily on how are we going to communicate this? How are we going to manage it? How are we going to really turn change detractors into change champions? And that's really what we focused on in the way that we're building out our internal communications and training. So I know we're running up on time here. I feel pretty good. I almost nailed it like perfectly. So this is the call to action. These are your key takeaways. So as you go back to your organization, think about the different ways that identities are being consumed and used today. Is it effective? Do you have Walter-type situations where someone's going to call in and you've got weak protocols for verifying ID before sensitive tasks or high-risk actions are going to be taken? Think about how would you potentially be able to incorporate Enter ID with verified ID into those workflows? And also think about the facial recognition. Is this something that would be effective for your organization? It is. It's definitely something that requires some setup. It requires some back-end due diligence. It requires some potentially policy changes as an organization. But at the end of the day, we've found that it gave us the greatest peace of mind in order to be able to move forward with these high-risk actions in the most confident and comfortable way. And then last but not least, organizations like Insight, we're here to help. We've been on this journey before. We're obviously major partners with Microsoft. This is an area where we invest in heavily, both from an overall back-end Entra ID skill and capability, but also the software developers to help incorporate that into your day-to-day organizational workflows. So with that, thank you all again so much for your time. I hope you found this valuable. And please come visit us at booth 927 down in the hub. When you come down the stairs, you can't miss it. The big fuchsia insights right in your face. Would love to talk to you more about it. So enjoy the rest of your conference.